By the time Jesus' boat docks at Gennesaret and he and the disciples leave, his fame has preceded him, and people began to mob him. Word spreads throughout that the healer is here, the one who's done miracles, things that nobody had expected, has arrived. And this spreads, and the people come. But not only the people come, but those in power are beginning to pay attention. And the Pharisees are watching him. And they say to him, "Who are you? You're not one of us. You can't even wash your hands before you eat." And we have to remember that they didn't know what a germ was back then. So hand washing had nothing to do with washing your hands so that you wouldn't contract a disease or an illness. But it had to do with making a space around your beliefs and keeping them holy. So those who could washed their hands before prayers, before they ate, anytime they wanted to declare a space or a practice, something for God, they washed their hands. And that was a lovely thing, unless you were somebody who worked in the fields, or were a fisherman, or were poor. You had no access to fresh water, and you were working. You didn't have time to access that. So part of what the Pharisees are doing is saying, you're not important, we're important. We have enough time and wealth and power to be able to follow the practices that make us holy. You clearly cannot be a holy person. And Jesus goes on to say, you may do all these things, but I know what's in your heart. And the human heart is capable of truly awful things. Look inside, see what you find. And I read that, and I thought about it, particularly this morning as I was driving in and people were weaving in and out of traffic, and my heart was not feeling particularly happy with people. In fact, I was rather angry. And I thought about how often we don't check in with our hearts. We don't pay attention to what we're really feeling. We hold what we believe, but how that is actually practiced or a part of us and a part of how we live every day, sometimes that doesn't happen. And I think part of it is because we tend to focus more on what we think and say than rather what we feel and what's going on inside of us. But it's really important because, as Jesus says, what comes from your heart comes out into the world, one way or another. You decide, but that's unfortunately the way it works. So I thought about that, and I thought, how do we check in with our hearts? Now, the Pharisees thought they were doing that by washing their hands. They had rituals to set aside space and time to check in with themselves. But those rituals became just empty practices. They weren't really looking at their hearts. They were just doing things to look good. So I thought, I wonder what we can do to help us have practices that help us really check in with our hearts. And I thought about the Jesuits. I had a good friend for a long time who was a Jesuit, and he was sharing with me one of the practices that they do. And it's in this book called Sleeping with Bread. And it looks like it's a kid's book, but it's not. It's a book for grown-ups. And the practice is called the examen, sort of like you take an exam, but you're examining your heart. And what they suggest is that every night before you go to sleep, you ask yourself 2 questions. The first one is this: for what moment today am I most grateful? For what moment today am I most grateful? And then the second one is, for what moment today am I least grateful? I thought about those two questions. They're really simple. For what moment today am I most grateful? That's kind of easy. But it opens up a lot of things. So, my two youngest grandchildren are at home because they've been exposed to COVID. And I thought, I'm really grateful they're home. But it also made me aware of the anxiety I was feeling around it. How are they doing? Are they running a fever? Are they showing any symptoms? That question made me really explore what I'm grateful for and why. And then for the second one, for what moment today am I least grateful? Again, it was driving, and the things I were thinking about the people who were cutting in front of me were not helpful to either me or anyone else. And I realized that when I go to that place, it generates anxiety and fear and tension in me that carries into my day. These two questions allow us to really look at our lives, to examine our lives, and to know where our heart is, and what we're doing, and how we're feeling. And from that, it changes how we interact with the world. And that's what Jesus calls us to do. We're called to be change makers in the world. We're called to bring God's love into the world. It's really difficult to do that when we haven't examined our whole heart. When we bring the things that are tying us up, making us angry, anxious, frustrated into the world, we're not doing what we're called to do. So I invite you to consider these two questions. What am I most grateful for today? What am I least grateful for today? Spend some time thinking about those, just a bit of time every night. I really think it will change lives. Amen.